Yo, this is Chuck, and welcome to the How to Defeat Dudes video blog. So not too long ago, I was having a chat with one of my subscribers and a good friend of mine from Ireland, Mr. Ciaran Malloy. Sorry if I messed that pronunciation all up. Anyway, he was watching episode 2 of the show on bear hugs, and he made the comment that every time he'd ever seen a street fight where there was a bear hug, basically one dude just rushed in, picked the other dude up like this, slammed him on the ground, and then everybody else just ran in and started beating him. Now, in the show, I always teach that the best way to get out of a bear hug is to go for the fingers, because the fingers are the weakest link in the chain. But his question is, how can you go for the fingers when it all happens so quickly? Now my answer to that was that, just like I said in the show, the very first thing you have to do when somebody grabs you from behind with a bear hug is you have to spread your legs, lower your center of gravity, and then establish a base. Now granted, if they outweigh you by like 50 pounds, then they might still be able to just lift you all the way off your feet and then slam you to the ground. But in most cases, if you establish a really good base, then that's going to be very, very hard for them to do, especially if the weight difference isn't that huge. If you don't know what I'm talking about with all this base establishing stuff, that means that you need to watch episode 2 of the show. And if you have seen episode 2 of the show, then that means all y'all know exactly what it is that I'm talking about. And that, my friends, is what's going to buy you the time, even if it's just like 10 seconds, to go for the fingers. Now let's say, heaven forbid, that they do actually manage to lift you up off the ground and then slam you down. Now, in that case, what you need to do is you need to fall back on the techniques that we all learned from episode 11, defending yourself on the ground. Use that to keep them away until you can stand back up on your feet, just like on this show. Now, aside from wanting to answer that question, I also really wanted to make this video because I thought his question addressed a much, much bigger issue, which is, what do you do when martial arts techniques don't work? Now, I've been doing martial arts for pretty much every doggone day for the past 19 years. And if there's anything that I can tell you from all those years of training and all those hours put in, is that absolutely none of this stuff is perfect. Absolutely every technique has some situation where it'll work almost perfectly in, and then some other situation where it may not work at all. Actually, the same thing goes with styles. Jiu-jitsu, absolutely amazing if you need to fight somebody on the ground, or if you need to take somebody off of their feet, or maybe even fight somebody that's bigger than you. Horrible for a multiple opponent scenario. For those, you need to be up on your feet, you need to be striking, and you need to be able to run as soon as you can get an opening. Taekwondo, on the other hand, pretty damn good for a multiple opponent scenario, or also for any kind of a parking lot fight situation where you've got room to move and room to kick. Not so good for a super crowded bar kind of situation. Even sport MMA, which takes a lot of the best elements from a bunch of different martial arts, puts them all together and then mixes them all up, even that still has its weaknesses. One, for example, is the fact that it teaches you how to fight in the context of sport rules. And on the street, in any kind of a fight situation, there are no rules. To that end, there's no kind of training for multiple opponent scenarios, found weapons, knife defense, or all other kinds of things that can actually happen in a real fight. It's not perfect. So anyways, guys, the point that I'm making is that none of this stuff is perfect. However, that doesn't mean that it won't work. So guys, what that means is you have to take whatever it is that you know, be that judo, be that taekwondo, be that kickboxing, MMA, whatever, and you have to simply adapt it to the situation as it comes. Example, when I was in college, I had a judo coach who was a survivor of a multiple opponent scenario. Pretty impressive stuff, particularly because judo isn't very good for multiple opponent scenarios. So he was at the bar, ended up getting surrounded by dudes, grabbed one of them, tried to throw him, but then ended up on the ground getting kicked by the other guys. So basically what he did is he just grabbed the guy that went down with him, pulled him close, choked him out, and then used the guy's body like a shield while the other dudes were kicking them until somebody could come and break up the fight. Now that, my friends, is a perfect example of adapting what you know. Even though the martial art that he was trained in wasn't very well suited for that particular situation. Now, to give you guys a ring fighting example from my own experience, not too long ago I was cross-training with a friend of mine who's a shoot boxing champion. And he challenged me to a fight in front of all of his students, which means he probably wanted to whoop my ass. Now, having fought lots of different people from lots of different styles before, I knew that if I fought him in his own rule system, he was gonna demolish me. So instead, I thought, why don't we be fair and why don't we fight in something that's unfamiliar to both of us? Let's box! As a taekwondo guy, more than anything else, I'm mainly just a kicker. But if there's anything I've learned from taekwondo fighting, is that if you're fighting somebody that's bigger than you, or stronger than you, or they could destroy you if they get near you or get inside, then you have to draw a line and you just never let them cross that line. If they do, bam, you gotta give it to them. Now, the reason that I suggested boxing is because I have a much longer wingspan than he does, just because I've got really long, kind of gangly arms. And as a function of that, all I would have to do was follow that same taekwondo fighting mentality. I draw a line and I just never let him cross it. I just draw the line, and then if he came in, boom, I jab, boom, I jab, boom, I jab. And then as a function of that, he never actually got in, and I won the fight because he never managed to touch me. Much to his dismay. It's totally cool though. I mean, we're really good friends, so it was all just in good, clean fun. Now, speaking of boxing, another good example of that is the fact that when you study boxing, you know, one of the first things you learn is just jab, cross, hook, upper, right? Jab, cross, hook, upper. Everybody who studies boxing learns this combination, but not even the best boxer on earth ever lands all four. What's more likely to happen is that as you throw the first two, 1, 2, they block those, and then while they're distracted from blocking these, boom, you catch them with the hook, and then you maybe clip them with the upper going down. Or, boom, boom, they block the first two, they kind of get the hook, but then that opens it up, boom, and then you can catch them with the upper. But nobody ever gets all four, but you train for all four. So that, you might be able to get in one. Another good example might be the wrist escapes that I taught you from the very first episodes of the show. Now let's say you try the technique and it doesn't work. What that means instead is that you kick them in the leg, or you spit in their eye, or you take their attention away, and then you try it again when they're not focused on their arms. You just adapt it however you have to make it work. Now to give you guys another personal example, several years ago, I was over at a friend's house with a bunch of people, and then, you know, I was just messing around with this one dude, and then what started off kind of really playful and really fun ended up getting pretty serious, and then he ended up having me in this really bad headlock, and the headlock escape that I learned didn't work. But what it did do is it got me into a position where I could knee him in the balls repeatedly. And I did. Over and over and over again. And then eventually he let go. So guys, that's exactly what I mean. You have to take whatever technique it is that you know, and you just have to adapt it to the situation. Please don't get tied up in this idea that you got to use the technique exactly the way you learned it, because the situation isn't going to go down exactly the way that you trained it. You know, if you trained against this kind of wrist grab, they might grab you like this. You know, it might be that if you train for certain boxing combinations, you know, they might cut you off in the middle of it by clipping you with a jab or something, and then you just gotta come back with something else. Whatever the situation may be, the most important thing is that you absolutely do not lock yourself into the confines of your own mental constructs revolving around a certain technique. You have to free your mind, as it were. You think that's air you're breathing, Neo? So anyways guys, as I'm sure you can tell, I'm starting to run out of sunlight, so I'm afraid that's all that I can say about the topic at the moment. As always, if you have any questions, if something doesn't necessarily make sense, or if something isn't clear, please feel free to just drop me a line or just leave me a comment, and I'll try to get back to you as fast as I can. Now there are times where I'm busy and it takes me a little bit longer than others to write back, but in general, if I can, I'm always gonna get back to you, okay? So anyways guys, that's all that I got to say for today. Thank you so much for watching, and hopefully see you next time. Yosh!